So what we're going to look at is prepping your image for printing. And this image is actually, this would be almost a nightmare for a print. You're talking a lot of whites, a lot of neutrals, with splashes of color in the middle. This is a very difficult print to make and make nice. And the reason why it's hard to make a print like this nicely is because of all these neutral colors that you have in here. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up either you're going to have a color cast on the snow with a color print, or you're going to lose and desaturate your colors that you might have on the subjects that we have in the photograph here. But we're going to use it anyway. It's really actually pretty simple to prep your images. The first thing is you want to go through that whole process that I showed you before in that one demo about making sure that the items that you're looking at or the objects that you're looking at in your photograph all have the correct curves, contrast, emphasis, that sort of a thing. So, you know, one of the first things that I might do is lift up my contrast on those trees a little bit, and you notice when I do that, that blows out all of the snow and everything, so I can kind of bring that back here and just kind of do that, and it also blows out the sky a little bit here. And we'll probably see this image again because I'm going to do a demo on HDR photography, because we're going to talk about that in a month or two, and this is actually one set of an HDR image. So there, now I've kind of set up the trees a little bit better the way I might want them, but the snow is also kind of lifeless. You know, you want to look at these things really, really specifically. The highlights are kind of dull, so I might put another curves layer on there, and I might boost my highlights up on the snow. And then bring the mids down a little bit, because I want to keep the detail in the snow, but I do want the snow to be pure white, which makes a lot of sense. And so again, I might take this and just again use my layer masks and kind of get rid of, mask out the sky and the trees here, so that this adjustment layer is only working on the snow. And as it turns out, it actually did a pretty good job in helping the people here as well, and making them look a little brighter. And so that works out pretty well. But you can see how that made the snow actually look like snow. It actually did a pretty good job of that. And zooming in on details is also very important to do. And if you look at your histogram, once you mask things out, your histogram will actually show you where your tones are. And so you'll see that right here, this is the huge spike in my highlight areas just on this bottom half of the photograph. I didn't really explain that well. When you mask something out and you click on the histogram is going to show you only the data for what is not been masked out. So because I masked out the snow, this histogram here is not reading the sky. Consequently, watch the histogram change if I click here. This histogram is including only the trees, and so you can see how the histogram changes dramatically to reflect the values of what is not masked by that layer, that adjustment layer. So this actually is really helpful because it shows me where my tones are, and beyond just visually, I can also set it up so that I'm looking at where my tones are, and this little slider here is telling me where my purest whites are. And so you can see if I move that to the right over here, things start to look a little duller. Whereas if I move the slider over to the left, this is telling the computer to put my purest white right at about this step. And then I can take my middles and bring them down if I want to, and I can also slide my shadow area over from the left towards the right, and that's going to increase my contrast. Go too far, you get something like this. But if you just do a slight adjustment, you will oftentimes see a real nice change in the way that the shadows and the highlights look. So because I've kept my two suns in the shot, if I take this and let this go down, you can see how the data starts to go away from their jackets and everything, which isn't horrible. And a lot of it depends on the feel of the print. But if I do want to see that, I'm going to lift that back up and now you can see that I'm gaining some detail in the wrinkles and stuff of their jackets, and I can slide this over just a touch to punch the blacks a little bit more. And that's not a bad edit. I'm not going to spend as much time as I might if it were my, a finished print, because I do want this to continue. I want the demo to go relatively fast. But if we just take a look at this, okay, before, after. So you can really see how more emphatic it's gotten, how I've retrieved some detail in the tree areas. I've also made my white snow look like white snow instead of kind of underexposed and blah. It pops a little bit more. And then if I really wanted to, I probably would do an adjustment layer. Oh, fine, we'll do it. I'm convincing myself here. What I might do is an adjustment layer just on my boys. And so when I get to this point, I'll go like a little nuts with the adjustment layer, and then I can paint this out, and then I kind of know where I am. And I can kind of get this back around. So go a little bit harder brush here. And now what I can do is while the selection isn't perfect, or the mask isn't perfect, it's pretty darn close. I can make a pretty good adjustment here on the people and just adjust their contrast a little bit more. And I'm actually thinking as I'm going through this that the snow still looks a little muddy. So I'm going to adjust that other layer a little bit too before I make a print. So, and that's important. Like I keep pushing, and usually what ends up happening, I like to push until I know I've gone a little too far, and then I will back off and go back. And by pushing too far, sometimes you realize that you needed a little bit more than you actually gave a layer or an image. So let's see, we're almost good there. So now what I can do is I can back off of this, okay? And you can really see he's got a halo here, but we'll back off and it will become a little bit less. And then I'm going to just lift up my midtones a little bit just to allow some of those details to kind of come through again on them. And that doesn't look too shabby. Go back to the snow layer, and I might brighten that up just a little bit more, bring that to the left a little bit more, and just make sure that I've kept my detail. But it looks pretty good. I can see a lot of snow detail, except for here. Notice how it's blocking, the highlights are kind of blocking up here. So that's where I might take this, get a nice big brush, take my opacity down really low, take the hardness of the brush really low, and just paint out that section a little bit so that I get the contrast back where I need it over here. And that's just because of where the sun was, and you have a big highlight there, and that looks pretty good. Now I've kept a lot of detail in the snow. I've kept detail where I want. He still has a little bit of a halo around him, so I would go in closer and take care of that. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to call this done, okay? The other thing that you see that I may, oh, you know what? The other thing that's really important is, and I think I showed you this before, check your mask by alt-clicking in it. Look, I forgot a huge section. Guess what? That's going to change. That's going to change what I just painted over here. So I know that I don't want any of that, so I'm going to take my opacity back up to 100%, take the hardness of the brush back up, and I'm just going to fill in some of these holes here and make sure that I don't have any big areas. And I'm thinking that, yeah, now this section over here looks really bad. So I'm going to go back here, grab the eraser, and undo what I just did there. And see how that looks. Ah, that's much better. Okay, so now we've got a pretty good image. We're basically ready to print. However, now comes the really important part. This is where it's highly individual based upon the printer, based upon your computer, based upon your monitor, everything. The best thing to do, especially if you're doing this at home, is to have a calibration system. Now, we spent $300 and some odd on a Spider color calibrator, which works really well for us. I think it was a Spider 3. you know, they range anywhere from $150, $200 on up to well in thousands, you know, $1,000 range. And what it does is it actually, you put it on a suction cup basically on your monitor, it reads your monitor and it calibrates everything. Then you tell it what printer you're using and what paper you're using, and all that gets pretty well set and done. I find that even with calibration, a lot of times what I have to do is add one more layer adjustment, and that is just an overall layer adjustment for print only. So I'll actually make a curve layer, and I will entitle this for print only. Now, before I tell you what I do with this curves, let me show you. See how we've got these gaps here in between our histogram? We don't have that nice smooth curve. That's actually a bad thing. What that means is, by doing all the curves layer that I've done, I've stretched my pixel data out from shadow to highlight, and I've actually now lost my full range of tones. I shouldn't really say it's a bad thing, it just kind of is a thing. You do need to be careful about that. That's pretty normal right there if you've done a lot of manipulation in Photoshop to an image. However, if you go further into it and you keep going and these gaps get bigger and bigger and bigger, it's important for you to realize that you've actually degraded your image pretty dramatically, and you do need to be mindful of that because it can be a big issue. So anyway, what I'll do with this last for print only is I'll do a couple of things. Depending upon the print, and that's for our printer here, which we've got the Canon Pro 9000s here, I'm going to take my midtones and I'm going to lift them up about 10% or so. Boom. Just like that. That looks too bright. It looks just a touch too bright. But what we found is these printers like to do what we call, I mean, all printers do it to a degree. It's called dot gain. And it has to do with the subtractive color mixing process. When you are mixing dyes on a paper and you're spraying these little dots next to each other, you're blending the colors to create, you know, you've got, I don't know, we've got 10 ink primaries inside this inkjet printer. So you've got 10 inks that are blending together to create millions of colors. So they're blending on the paper as they get sprayed onto the paper in these little dots. Based on subtractive color mixing, as the inks blend together, they dull down, they darken the tone. Unlike light, the additive system, which is what you're mixing with when you're looking at a color monitor, when you mix colors, they get brighter because it's light. When you're mixing colors with pigments, they get darker. That's why it's called the subtractive color mixing system. So printers will have what they call dot gain, especially in the midtones. When they're blending the colors, they bleed together, and when the inks mix, they get darker and a little duller. This is one of our major issues with printing, is that you're moving from an additive color system, i.e. light, on a monitor, and you're going to a subtractive color mixing system on the printer, and the two don't always translate well. Now, the color software that we have and the calibration should take care of it, but what I've found with many printers, and ours is no exception, is that you do have to lift the midtones up just a tiny little bit to kind of counteract that dot gain. It may be an issue of us not having the calibration systems perfectly, done perfectly. These monitors that we have are super awesome, so I hesitate to say that it's the monitors, but it might be. There's a whole host of problems that you can run into when you print. But just for us here, and if you ever have a problem printing at home or anything like that, one of the first things to do if it looks muddy and dark in the midtones and you're starting to lose like detail in the skin, is just lift your midtone curve. Just make a curve like I did there, entitle it for print only, and just lift the curve up like you saw there, maybe about 10%, 10 to 15% tops. The other thing that I will oftentimes do for this printer and this printer only is I'll go to my red, and I found that this printer likes to print a little green in here, and I have a tendency to like warmer prints anyway, and so I will add just a touch of red. I mean, ever so subtly, just a touch of red. I put that up. If you look here, the input is 126. I lifted it by 3 points. 129 is what it says. That's about all you need, especially with something like this with snow, because it's so neutral and so cold. You probably don't want to lift too much red in there. In fact, I probably made a mistake by doing that with snow, but on a normal print, that's probably what you want to do. So once you're ready to go, then what you need to do is you need to get this set up for the printing process. Now, since I'm not actually, the computer that I have the recording software and the projector on isn't the computer that has the printer, we're going to run this for pretend. You're going to go File, Print, and I won't have the printer here, but you're going to choose your printer, and under the list here you'll see a Canon Pro 9000. I'm going to choose the color setting, the color printer here. And then what you're going to do is you need to select portrait or landscape. So you're going to hit landscape for this photograph. If your photograph is a portrait, you would go portrait. And you'll notice I'm still not getting all of my image. So if I go down to the bottom here, and you see where it says scale to fit media, I have a couple of options. I can check the scale to fit media button, and then what happens is my print comes in and it will have white space at the top and the bottom because my camera has a wider aspect ratio than the paper itself. The paper is a little bit more square-ish than the paper is, than the photograph is. The photograph is more rectangular-ish. So I can do that. The other thing that I can do is I can manually adjust the height and the width this way. So if I wanted to print full top to bottom, I can take my height and type in 11. And now you can see my width is still 16. Well, if I hit tab, that's not right. Oh, I'm thinking I was on 11 by 17 inch paper for a second there. My height needs to be 8.5. Okay, so if I type in 8.5 there, now you can see that it's doing what it needs to do horizontally, but I'm still chopping off a person over here. And the reason for that is because the position has been centered. What I can do is uncheck that, and I'll take my left value and I'll set it to 0. And now what it's doing is it's putting the left of the photograph at 0 here, and it's chopping off the top pretty centered. So the top is negative 0.166. And I can actually play with that. I can say like negative 0.5, and that'll move it over. But I like the left at 0 for this image. And now what will happen is I'm losing some of the data or some of the image that's off on the right. Every photograph is different. You may not want that. You may want to go full scale to fit media where you get a widescreen image, or you might want to do this. It's up to you, and you're just going to have to kind of set that the way you want. The other thing that's really important before you hit the print button is to set the paper type, and you want to set it to borderless printing. So we're going to go to our print settings, and I probably will not be able to set either of those things because I am printing to the wrong printer here. Paper type and quality, see, because I'm in this printer, I can't set it the way I want to. But under paper type and quality, you can set it to whatever we're using. Most of the time, I like semi-gloss. I like a photo semi-gloss. We'll set that. And then borderless printing is usually in here somewhere too, under the paper type or quality or the effects. I forget which one it is. But you'll see it. The borderless printing will get rid of the margins. You can see the margins here around the photograph, okay? That will get rid of that and will allow it to print edge to edge on the printer that we have. Does that make sense to everybody? So now what I would do is I can do one of two things. I could hit the print button, in which case it's going to come out of our color laser, which is going to look awful because the color laser is not that good, as you guys found out when we did our contact sheets. Or I can hit done. And when I hit done, it kind of locks some of those settings in, and then I can save my file. So I'm going to save it, and now all my print settings are basically ready to go, and I can move to the other printer. We have calibrated these monitors to basically be all the same. So one of the things that you can do is you can prep your image while somebody else is printing. Get it all ready, hit the done button, save it, Then when you move over to the computer over there, you're ready to go, and all you have to do is change the paper and click borderless printing and make sure everything else is right, but you've basically prepped it all within a hair's breadth of what you're going to need. So right now I can close this and we could go to the other printer and we're going to make a print. But does this make sense from what I was just showing you as far as how to do that? Okay, so now that's basically it. So in review, really quickly, 1, manage your curves. You're going to take care of your curves. You're going to make sure that what you want emphasized is emphasized correctly. You're going to make sure that you've got the detail levels that you need from every section and every element inside your photograph. And then lastly, you're going to take an overall curves layer. You're going to lift the midtones up 10 to 15% so that it is just a touch brighter than you think you need in the midtones only. You generally should not alter the highlights or the shadows, just that curve in the middle. Okay, and you can see it here if I go back to RGB. You can see how I've altered that curve in the middle. That's going to work really well for our printer. Some printers, if you go home and you try to do this, you might need more or less. And that's where you just have to use up, you buy a pack of paper, sometimes it's a throwaway, and you start playing with it, and you'll eventually get a feel for your printer. And it takes a while, but eventually you just get a sense of what it's going to do and how it looks on the monitor. If you buy a new monitor, chuck all that out the window, because now everything's different. Buy a new computer, you know, I mean, like everything. One little piece of this can change everything. It's a very complicated process, but it does work. So save that, and basically, I'm ready to print.